Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Welcome to another Reads and Rambles, where I talk at irregular intervals about bookish things and other things that have been happening in my life over the last week or two. The biggest news, honestly, is that we here in Washington, D.C. have had a couple of snowfalls. More snow than we've seen in the last couple of years, although the amount that stuck was actually quite small compared to what the areas north of us, including the cities of Philadelphia and New York and Boston, received. The snow on Sunday fell fast and wet, with enormous flakes. Abe, my 21-year-old son, took a slow-motion video from our front stoop, a video that shows how big even the most typical snowflakes were. Some people saw absolutely enormous flakes that they called snow pancakes or snow waffles. The weather reporters repeated these phrases and then posted this picture with the caption, "Giant snowflake knocks woman unconscious." Basically, because of the borderline freezing temperatures, snowflakes started to melt around their edges and then bumped into each other because of the relatively intense snowfall. The wet edges joined together, and because of the very dry air that day, the melted parts evaporated quickly and the snowflakes joined together more solidly. There were also air current conditions that meant the snowflakes spent longer in the air, being lifted repeatedly into a slightly warmer upper area again and again before falling to the ground, and therefore having more opportunities to go through this accretion process. I'm no meteorologist, and some of this may not be exactly accurate, but whatever the cause, the huge snowflakes were fascinating and beautiful. There have been multiple small snowflakes over the past 2 weeks, but the weather is warm enough that when it isn't snowing, there is usually nothing left on the ground. In fact, as I was reading one sunny afternoon, I kept listening to what sounded almost like rain as the snow melted and dripped off the roof near my window. Very peaceful sound. One other weather-related note here. The night of President Biden's inauguration, there was a truly amazing fireworks display down at the National Mall, the Long Park area in downtown D.C., where the major protests and festivals and other celebrations are often held. For years, I've talked about the fireworks set off to celebrate the nation's bicentennial in 1976, which I saw on television when I was a child, as the most amazing fireworks I've ever seen. But these may have displaced them. We were watching the inaugural fireworks on screen, but as we heard the explosions on my laptop, where we were streaming them, we could also hear enormous booms outside, and we could feel our house vibrating on its foundations. It was amazing. My favorite local meteorologist, the Capitol Weather Gang, explained that there was a temperature inversion, an increase in temperature with height that prevents cooler air from rising and keeps the lower atmosphere almost an echo chamber where the sound traveled across long distances. We live almost 7 miles north of the Capitol, but the fireworks could be heard even 15 miles away. For the last few days, I've been watching current events at that same Capitol, the Senate trial of the impeached former president. I won't talk about it in detail here, but I do want to mention one thing. I mentioned in my video about the January 6th insurrection that Jamie Raskin, a House member who spoke beautiful words that day that were both important for the nation and intensely personal about the devastating loss of his son on New Year's Eve. He's a constitutional lawyer, one of the managers of the impeachment process, an eloquent and inspiring speaker, the House representative from my district, and my neighbor around the corner and down the street. I continue to be astonished and proud and honored to have Jamie in our government. I'll link to one of his most recent talks from the floor, and I really recommend that you go listen to his clear love of the Constitution and this country, as well as his deep humanity. Well, the next thing I want to do is respond to some of the interesting exchange posted by Barb at the Font and Katie Books, and a discussion that's now the subject of a much larger conversation on BookTube. I don't have anything particularly useful to add, but I do want to mention a couple of things I've realized fairly recently. My channel is a year and 5 months old now, which is kind of unbelievable, so I guess I'm no longer really a newbie, although I still often feel like one. I want to talk about two things, one about subscriber numbers and one about dislikes or down thumbs. First, subscribers. At the very beginning of my channel, I wasn't sure I wanted anyone to watch my awkward and somewhat random initial video. But within just a few days of posting my version of the BookTube newbie tag, I was thrilled to see how nice everyone was in the comments and how lovely it was to feel like I was being welcomed into this corner of the BookTube party. I loved watching my number of subscribers go up. It amused me, and it flattered me. But of course, I knew it really wasn't actually important to me. Watching the numbers go down occasionally was quite a bit harder at the beginning. And honestly, I had forgotten that until I saw this current discussion. My worry was not that my numbers were dropping. It was that I might have done something wrong and might have actively offended people without intending to. While accidentally offending people is not impossible, that is usually not why people unsubscribe. At some point, I realized two things. One is that it's hard to keep up with all of the phenomenal booktubers out there, even the ones that become personal friends and who read almost exactly what you read. There are times when I find myself subscribing to a channel because I love the person's style and the way they talk about their bookish life. And then later on, I often realize I'm totally overwhelmed by my absolute inability to keep up with watching the videos, even of my closest BookTube friends, and making comments and responding to comments, much less making my own videos, and even just reading some books. I sometimes go through my feed and unsubscribe to folks who have styles I love, but who tend to read stuff I don't read, like science fiction. And I'm sure people must do the same to me. Something might draw people to one video, and they subscribe, and then they see the other videos and realize that most of what I do here is not exactly what they're wanting to watch in their limited time for BookTube. I don't think I fully understood that is often the reason for unsubscribes until I found myself following so many people that I had to make those choices myself. This kind of unsubscribe is absolutely not about the quality of a channel. The other thing, kind of related, that I realized is that subscriber counts can very quickly go up if you're mentioned on someone else's channel, either a big booktuber who shares your channel link or even a small booktuber who really talks about you in a special way. I know I sometimes subscribe en masse to everything when someone lists a bunch of cool new booktubers without ever watching a video of theirs first, and then when I go through them, I sometimes winnow down a bit as I decide what works best for me. I'm sure people have subscribed to me without actually ever watching one of my videos, and then saw me talk in my very slow and quiet way, and realize that my style just isn't what they thought it might be and what they personally like watching. That's okay. If people decide our videos are not a perfect fit for their personal taste, it doesn't mean they're rejecting us as inferior or untalented booktubers. Even in our own little corner of BookTube, most of us really have to determine what our priorities are and make some choices because there's so much great stuff. So many clever and warm booktubers out there. And we're all going to make different decisions about what to watch and what to forgo based on our personal interests, but also based just on the limits of any particular day that could force us to forgo even our favorites. So, a few things about dislikes. First, sometimes people make mistakes. At least once, I was horrified to realize I had accidentally hit the down thumb instead of the up thumb. I know that sounds crazy, but often I try to click like as I head down to leave a comment. I forget to hit the like button often enough that I try to remember to check it again after I say whatever I want to say in the comments. And as I've said, it's quite disconcerting to see the unlike button pressed instead of what you meant to press. I may be the only one pathetic enough to do this, but if you only get one down thumb, just assume it was me being an idiot. I never leave down thumbs deliberately on anything, even when I'm watching some non-booktube thing that I think is just awful. Over time, I started to stress about occasional dislikes a lot less than I did at first, especially if your video gets the attention of a lot of new random viewers because it was featured on some page. Someone is bound to think your channel is not for them, and they want to send the YouTube algorithm notice that your kind of videos just shouldn't show up in their feed. Maybe they don't want bookish stuff at all, for example. And maybe they really don't like your style particularly. I don't care if people don't want to watch BookTube, or if they don't want to watch my videos if they think they're too slow, or too earnest, or too nerdy, or that I'm too old. None of that really feels like personal rejection of the video, if that makes any sense. Occasionally, though, I'll get a dislike on a video that does worry me a bit. For example, when I got a couple of dislikes on a video that talked about the Black Lives Matter protest in DC over the summer, I saw the first dislike and was immediately afraid I might have offended people of color or other activists. Had I said something offensive without meaning to? What did I need to grapple with that I had not yet grappled with? I really wanted someone to explain the problem they saw in the comments, but no one did. It took a while, but at some point I discovered that at least one of those dislikes came from a person who was disturbed by the existence of Black Lives Matter, and perhaps especially by white support of efforts for racial justice. All of this is to say that if you get a dislike, yes, it may mean that someone didn't think you did well at what you wanted to do. But it is at least equally likely that someone thought you did do what you wanted to do and they don't like it. After it happens enough, you realize you just aren't going to know unless someone reaches out to you in the comments, and it starts to get easier to let it roll by. Let me say that if you haven't seen the initial video that brought these questions up, and if you haven't seen the more comprehensive responses put out by Kim and Roz and Jay and Steve and others, they all have a lot of great things to say. I'll try to put a list together in the discussion box. Well, let's move on. Instead of finishing the fascinating advanced reader's e-copy of a book I'll be reviewing for a not terribly well-known print periodical later in the spring, but due on March 1st, and after taking a short but lovely afternoon nap, I spent both weekend afternoons with my husband David. We worked on a project together briefly. We watched a couple of episodes of West Wing. We're currently working our way through the library DVD for season 3. And we also listened together to some of an audiobook we started last weekend, John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Although both David and I have read several of Steinbeck's other works, neither of us have read this novel before. We do own a paperback copy of the book, which we can consult whenever we need to. I have kind of mixed feelings about audiobooks in general, as I've talked about before on this channel, but I've definitely become more attached to them during the pandemic. I like the narrator of East of Eden quite a bit. He's got a plain, direct voice that I think really works for Steinbeck's style. And as a person with some hearing issues, I'm deaf in one ear, and any background noise can make it hard for me to understand speech, I appreciate how clear the recording is. Several people on BookTube, religious and non-religious, have talked about how much their familiarity with the Bible, both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, has been useful in their wider reading because of the frequency of biblical allusions in other books. As you might guess from Steinbeck's title, East of Eden, that is certainly the case here. David and I are still in the very early sections of the book, and the religious allusions are almost hitting us over the head. I love that Steinbeck's versions of particular stories, from Genesis especially, are not literal retellings. They're more like individual moments of reflection, which can deepen the meaning of the sentences. Still, I have to say that at this point, I'm finding some of those resonances perhaps a bit too heavy-handed. Many of the readers I deeply admire here on BookTube have talked about how wonderful East of Eden is, so I'm hopeful that either I will relax into these allusions, or that the book will become a little more subtle. There's one quote I really love and identify with, which I want to share. For those of you who have listened to me talk about my introvert ways, you know that I don't think on my feet well at all. I need to write things down before I can talk with any fluency. BookTube is just one example of this. And I don't mean I just write down outlines or notes. Instead, I usually write more or less full versions of what I want to say when I film, and then rehearse it. The key is not that I am shy. It's a little different. I think by writing. And so does one of Steinbeck's characters, a man who writes letters to his brother away from home that allow him to share things that he's not yet fully understood before. Here's the quote. As with many people, Charles, who could not talk, wrote with fullness. He set down his loneliness and his perplexities, and he put on paper many things he did not know about himself. While David and I listen to the book, we're often knitting. I've started a garter-stitch shawl with mosaic sections, a shawl called the Study Hall shawl. I'm really enjoying the knitting, and while it has a bit of excitement here and there, it is actually quite straightforward to knit, so it makes sense to work on it while listening to an audiobook. The pattern is available for free online at the Knitty site, which you may know if you are a knitter, and I'll link to it below. I have kind of a habit of knitting the same pattern twice in a row, at least if it's not a huge project. For the study hall shawl, I'm thinking I might knit one in my son's school colors, if he thinks he would wear it while he studies. At the same time I'm working on the shawl, David is knitting a sweater for our college-age son, and it is really beautiful. A year ago or so, the two of us went to a yarn swap held at a local brewery. And at the end of the day, when no one had taken one woman's large and stunningly beautiful collection of natural colored yarn, perhaps because it was so gorgeous that no one felt like they could offer a reasonable trade, she came up to David and offered to give it to him. It was a wonderful gift. After talking with Abe about what kind of sweater he would like, David started winding the yarn into balls and cast on. I can't wait to see his project develop further. I'll share a picture sometime soon if both David and Abe approve. Well, that's it for today. During my next Reads and Rambles, I promise to talk more about some of the books I've been reading lately. Thanks for joining me here today on Hannah's Books. See you soon.